Hi, and welcome back to PSA, People, Stories, and Accounting. I am Yaacov Jacob.
And I'm Philip Stein, and happy to be here again. If you are listening to this and you're living in Israel, I might call this the procrastinator's dream. Okay, right?
Yes,
You
we
know,
are we are living in a world post apocalypse, a post deadline world.
if
You know,
don't like deadlines, God has answered your prayers. There's opportunities I think we'll talk about. There's perhaps issues that people should be aware of, but there's a lot going on here. But the title here is that if you live in Israel or you've been living in Israel the last couple of years, you really haven't had to file your tax return.
yeah, and this
Um,
is kind of like a lot of what the world has been developing into. People think of accountants as just number crunchers, and prepare my tax return. Here's the documents, plug them into the tax return, and that's it. A lot of the work is actually the advisory, right? The planning, the what you can do, and part of the problems is that when you're talking about planning, that we always have is there's forward planning, right? Like you can plan estate
correct.
tax things, you can advise and do all of this stuff going forward.
Mhm.
You can very, very rarely do it backwards. And sometimes there is the ability with some elections and the like to do things backwards for planning. Rarely or never do we see that you can go kind of this far back as you can with some of the planning techniques and ideas that come up now. And it's kind of getting to a crazy place. And maybe so just to set the stage and to bring everyone in on exactly what we're talking about, in 2023, I believe it was like over 2 years ago, right? When October 7th happened, the IRS basically extended all taxpayers' tax returns for anyone who is in Israel, any business that is in Israel, or anyone whose U.S. accountant is in Israel, like Phillips and Associates, right? They have an automatic extension until October 7th, 2024. Then Iran sent rockets and missiles, right, over to Israel in September 30th, 2024. And the IRS basically came out with a second extension saying everything is pushed off now until September 30th, 2025. And that was back everything that was already extended until October 7th, 2024 got pushed over again. So 2022 extended tax returns, 2023 tax returns, and 2024 tax returns were automatically extended until September 30th, 2025. And now, as the government was going into a shutdown, right? September 30th, 2025 was the last day that the government was open before the biggest government shutdown that we've had to date.
Yeah.
The IRS came out one more time and said, hey, now we're pushing everything off until September 30th, 2026. And that really kind of leaves the door open to crazy situations, some good, mostly good, some, could be looked at as in a bad light and the like. But it is a crazy world that we now live in terms of we haven't had deadlines for 3 years and we have everything extended until 2026. So we'll talk about
You're
what.
saying that man or woman who was, had the pile of proverbial papers on their desk in October 2022 or September 2022. No, right,
23.
23 to do their 2022 return. And they got, stay of execution, so to speak. Okay. And then they
Yeah.
got another stay of execution, which included 2023. And then now there's another. So there's people out there who theoretically have not filed since their 2021 tax return, right?
Yeah.
And there's no penalties. There's
No,
no
no
interest.
penalties. No
Okay.
issues. Not to really compare them, but you know the story about the guy who was in Nagasaki and then he survived it and got on a train and went to Hiroshima, I think
No,
it was.
no, it was
So
the other way around. Hiroshima
other
was
way around.
first, Nagasaki was second.
So there are some people who were in California during crazy weather situations there and had an extension, and then they came to Israel, and then October 7th happened, and they have now had like 4 years of just
Ah,
extended everything, and because the way that it is, the way that it's structured is it's a push off, so it's not just an extension, it really delays it, and so there's some added benefits there. But yeah, we are living in quite a crazy time where we have this full extension and what it can mean.
when I look back, there was really a time in the early days of me practicing where deadlines were really in stone, okay? And even people living in Israel, the December 15th deadline didn't always exist. That sort of evolved. You know, everyone at one point thought, well, October 15th, that's the latest you could file a tax return. Then if you send in, there's no form for it, as you know, to get that
Right.
extension. You have to send in a letter. Does anyone ever look at that letter? I don't think maybe you've seen a rejection. I don't recall everyone. There were other things too. There's a form that some of our clients have to do called check the box, and then they added like relief. Well, if you didn't check it within 75 days of, and then there were things like for people who forgot to take their required or minimum distribution. There used to be very harsh penalties if you didn't do that on time, and they got so there was something going on, I think, internally within the IRS that they moved away from this very harsh, hard, carved in stone deadlines. But this seems to really have gone to extremes now.
Yeah. And I would say it's funny because it's what the IRS provides is in many ways more than what the Israeli tax authorities are providing, right? One of the biggest pushes that we have right now are from Israeli accountants who are telling us, hey, we need to prepare the Israeli tax return. In order to do that, we need the US tax return to be done.
Right, right.
And so the push is really from Israel more than it is from the IRS,
That's
which is
fascinating, and yet Israel is where the war took place. And all right, so let's. I think you have a lot of you have a lot of interesting things to share. First of all, let's I guess talk basics. What do these extensions actually mean for people?
perfect. Yeah, so what we're going with is basically if you have to file a tax return, right? And any kind of payment that you have with that tax return, they are now automatically extended until September 30th, 2026. So usually, even if I extend my tax return, everyone is familiar with April 15th as the due date for, taxes. That is always when you think of accountants, you think of April 15th, right? And you can extend your tax return usually beyond that till October 15th. But even when you extend your tax return, it's an extension to file, not an extension to pay. And so there's always interest and late payment penalties. No late filing penalties, but late payment penalties that start to build up on that. With this, it's an automatic extension, which includes payments. So there's no interest, there's no penalties that are accruing on any of this. You have automatically until September 30th, 2026. You don't have to pay anything at all. You don't have to
Wow,
file anything at all. It's automatic if you are in Israel. That doesn't mean that the IRS won't make mistakes and think that you do owe all of this stuff, and you'll have to correct that with them. But it's doable, and you have this full extension. That doesn't only apply for tax returns, it also applies for estimated tax payments. So most people like to make sure that they're paying quarterly just to make sure that they're up and up on stuff. That also applies, so that's covered. And really, really, it extends most things, including some elections that you can make on tax returns as well. So you mentioned 83B. That's a big one, meaning 83B is something where a founder of a company or someone who gets restricted shares can say,
okay,
hey, I want to pick it up as income right now as if it fully vested for me. That's awesome. You can usually do that within 30 days of getting the grant. Now, all of a
correct.
sudden, we have some founders who might have opened up their company in October
Wow,
or
wow.
January 2023, right? They're moving over to the US. They've relocated to the US now in 2025. And we're like, hey, why don't you retroactively make an 83B election to when you opened it up? And this way, when you relocate, it's not as big of a problem for you. Um, it's really kind of crazy what you're able to do.
That's really what I would call magnificent tax planning.
Yeah, it's there's some pretty nut stuff in the works, but that's one of them. Now, what it doesn't include and what is important for people is while the federal government came out with all of these extensions, the states did not. And
Mhm.
so, usually we talk about how the federal return will give you a foreign tax credit, but
Right,
states
right,
don't, and therefore you
correct.
owe states all of this additional tax. Same thing here, meaning anyone who has a state tax return while you're able to extend your US federal tax return, the state still needs to be filed, and that does cause some kind of issues and problems in terms of you still need to file quickly. What I will say to that is some states have been better than others. Not to get too political, New York up to date has been okay if you claim a reasonable cause. to say, hey, the war has been going on. The IRS extended this. There should be reasonable cause to abate these penalties. I don't know how long that will have a favorable look upon people in Israel trying to claim reasonable cause and the
No,
like.
but what comes to mind, the famous expression of the way the tail wagging the dog. In other words, the dog is the federal tax return. That's usually what determines how you file your state return. It determines what you said a few minutes ago, how you file your Israeli tax return, because what you do on there. But what's happening is the Israeli tax authorities and the state authorities are sort of determining the timing and you having to do your federal tax return. It's sort of turned things on its head of where we saw, let's say, the federal tax return in the hierarchy here. So on the one hand, the federal government has granted these wonderful extensions, but a person still may have to go through the exercise of, in other words, I guess, Yaacov, I could see a scenario of preparing the federal tax return so you could
Yeah.
do a state return and a Israeli return, but not sending it in and just holding on to your money.
Yeah. And we've ran those scenarios for people, right? Like we did some tests of people that as a quick study, a quick good example is someone who owes $100,000 to the IRS. We looked at it and we said, okay, let's say they owed $100,000 in
Mhm.
2023, 2024, and 2025. They were to pay that money immediately upon filing the tax return, call it April 15th of the following year. Or if they were to hold on to that money, you can hold on to it, invest it, even if you're investing in bonds that could get you 2 to 4% interest, you're making
Sure,
significant
sure,
money
sure,
on
sure.
that rather than paying it to the IRS and letting it sit in their coffers, not earning anything. If you invested it in the stock market recently or before like a year ago, that money is earning you quite a pretty penny if it's in the S&P 500 instead of sitting with the IRS. So that it's really, really crazy what you're able
I
to do.
saw a client just the other day who showed me their year to date on their Israeli tax, their Israeli investment portfolio, a conservative, that they were not in Bitcoin and
Right.
Nvidia and what have you. I think their portfolio was up for the first 10 months of the year almost 11%. And then I just for fun factored in the dollar Israeli
Yeah.
exchange, and that was about another 11%. So here in a 10-month span, without speculating, you could make over 20% on your money. But on the other hand, what I'm hearing, and I think there's a very important message that you're relaying here, is that just because the feds gave these extensions, if you have an Israeli tax return to do, if you have a state tax return to do, you may be, going from the fry pan into the fire, or however it's said, because you could have some real problems with those. Those are tax authorities that they want their money and they want their returns.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say there are a lot of um, positive beneficial cases where, for example, an easy thing to talk about is superseding returns as opposed to amending returns, right?
Okay.
Um, and that can be, let's say you filed your tax return already for
Okay.
2023 or 2024,
Right.
and you forgot to take a certain position on it, or you didn't realize that you were holding PFIX and you needed to make some kind of special QEF election or mark to market or the like that needs to be happening on an original filed return. Or another example, which comes up frequently these days, is let's say you're preparing your 2024 or 2025 return, and you realize, wow, I have these RSUs and I'm paying a boatload of US tax on them. I could have included my non-US spouse and kind of been able to build up tax credits with their
Right.
regular salary income. All of a sudden, you can file a superseding return, right? Because that election to include spouses has to happen on the original filed return.
Mm,
But now a superseding return is if you file by the due date of that tax return, the extended due date of that tax return, instead of filing an amended or a fix for the tax return, a superseding return goes in place. It basically just says that original copy IRS, I want you to rip it up, and this is the new original filing.
so
And so
let
you
me
can,
let me throw at you an area that it's certainly something that lived with for many years, and there's a lot of people who are interested in actually, particularly for people who in Israel who have children born abroad, but they might either have to go to the States to make them citizens, or they need to get a social security number. So under normal circumstances, maybe to just refresh people's memories, or make them aware of the basic rules having to do with kids born abroad. Okay.
Yeah. So and particularly when dealing with the embassies abroad, it gets complicated. Meaning, if you have a child who is born, call it 23, you had a newborn in 2023, Mazel Tov, you have to get them citizenship within 2023 in order to claim them on your
Right.
tax return. So citizenship is really, really the most important aspect of that. You must make sure that you apply and get them citizenship right away. Social security numbers, and this is interesting, you have to have a social security number that is issued before the extended due date of your tax return, right? That was something put back in the Obama era.
Hmm.
He changed it so that this way you had to have that social security number already issued by the extended due date. Otherwise, you couldn't get it retroactively.
Right.
So let's say you have that child born in 2023 and they are automatically considered a US citizen because you were a US citizen and lived in the US for over 10, 15 years,
Right.
right? So now your kids are automatically US citizens, even if they were born abroad.
Correct.
You would have to get that social security number before the deadline of your tax return. If they were born in November 2023, meant by October, the latest, potentially, you had to have a social security number issued for them. You try to make an appointment at the embassy in Jerusalem for a social security number for your kid. Good luck having that be within the next 3 months. It's going to take months for that appointment to be set. And then, even if you get that appointment, it will take months until you hear back from the government. Very often, it gets lost in processing and the like, and you have to do it again. So, the nice thing here is that they have to be US citizens by the end of the year, the tax year. But
Okay.
let's say
So
again,
that
they have
example you
automatic.
bought, that child who was born
Yeah.
in 2023, you still, whatever the IRS is giving as extensions, that has not changed, right?
So you still, again, if you it's a fine nuance. If that child is automatically a US citizen because their parents
Uh,
lived in the US
got it.
long enough,
Got it. Okay.
they will be US citizens retroactively to their
Right.
birth.
Right.
And so for them, you actually can. You have time now. If you haven't filed
Network.
your 2023 tax return, you haven't gotten them that social security number yet, you can still apply as long as you get it before September 30th, 2026 and file your tax return. It will count. And those kids can be taken on your 2023, 2024, and 2025
Hmm.
tax returns.
Hmm.
I would go one step further. If you filed those tax returns and didn't include those kids, you can again file that superseding return now and say, "Hey, I
Yeah,
got the
that,
social security number. I live in Israel. Give me an additional
that's
$1,700 for
really valuable.
2025." Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Have you, what you hear, again, what you hear on the street, from my own experience of getting social security numbers for grandchildren, it seems to be, for when I did it, it was very easy to do it in the US. Is that still the case from what you hear from people?
So yeah, it still seems to be easier in the US.
Got it.
And I will say anyone who's getting it through the grandparents clause, absolutely, it's very important there to go to the US to get that citizenship before year end and the like.
So if someone knocked on our door today, client, if I was talking 5 years ago and they said I haven't filed in a few years, we'd say, well, here's a couple options. You might be eligible for a Streamline program. Now, today, someone knocks on the door, no one knocks on the door anymore, but
Yeah.
picks up the phone, sends you an email,
Sends you a WhatsApp. Yeah.
sends you a WhatsApp, and says, you know what, I just never got my act together. I haven't filed for 3 years. I know I was supposed to file. Um, that person really can just doesn't need a Streamline, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what Streamline does, and it actually puts Streamline in a very weird, uncomfortable place, I would say.
Okay.
Streamline protects you against prior years. So let's say you weren't compliant for
Uh,
ever. And
got
now
it.
all of a sudden, the Streamline filing program is really a beneficial program to say, look, IRS, I didn't realize I had to file. I want to come clean now. I wasn't trying to evade taxes or anything shady. I just didn't realize I had to file these tax returns being a US citizen living abroad. The Streamline program was a way to file 3 years of tax returns, 6 years of a form called an FBAR form, and get back into compliance with the IRS. And that would protect you against all of the prior years as well. So let's say you filed 3 years back, all of the prior years before those 3 years were out of the question for the IRS. Now, all of a sudden, because it's the past 3 years of late filed tax returns, 2023, 2024, 2025 are all considered timely. And so if you're filing Streamline, you really have to go 3 years before that. Most cases, you can electronically file 23, 24, 25. And then if you had something before that, it doesn't give you protection. You don't have to go through the Streamline program that way, though, and it will usually solve a lot of the problems and issues that people have. But if you are trying to protect yourself and you want to go backwards, you might have to file for 5 to 6 years back these days.
So the question I've been asked, and I'm going to throw it at you. Besides the tax return, which we've been talking about here, most people in Israel, most people, certainly clients of ours, also file the, as you referred to a few moments ago, the FBAR form. It's a report about foreign bank accounts or foreign financial accounts. That is not, it doesn't go with your tax return. It's sent to a separate address. Now, not even address. I believe you can only file it electronically these
Yeah.
days. Is that under the umbrella of these extensions, FBAR as well?
So it's odd, and I will say somewhat unclear.
Okay,
When the original IRS extension came out in 2023, FinCEN, who governs the FBAR filing, also came
right.
out and said, we are going to extend this as well under the IRS extension. It works for us too. The IRS then came out with two subsequent additional extensions, and FinCEN didn't say a word.
Hmm.
So it's questionable if the FBARs are extended or not. There might be a case to claim that they have been extended, and they could come back theoretically and say, no, we never extended it 2024 and 2025. Just the 2023 extension is what we did. I will say though that generally speaking, if your tax return is filed timely and includes all of your income, then there isn't as much fear for the FBAR form. And therefore, I would say make sure the tax return is complete and timely filed. If you haven't filed your FBAR yet for 2024 or 2023, and then you can still do it and rest easy that no one will come knocking on your door.
Okay, so you procrastinators out there, life is good, but you might want to still consider filing, okay, for some of the reasons that Yaakov mentioned here, particularly if they owe you money, okay? Because just like you said, Yaakov, there's no penalty and interest. Well, it's also the other way. The IRS isn't, you could be using that money that the IRS owes you. And with regard to if you're a person, a founder, receive restrictive stock, you didn't get around to getting your kids' social security numbers who are US citizens, there's some real opportunities here.
Yeah, if you relocated in the past couple of years to the US and you feel like the planning didn't happen properly, you might be able to retroactively fix some of the situation up. It's pretty cool what you can
Yeah,
do.
the famous story I always tell about people doing relocation. I get a call from a client. I got a call from a client and said, I've been told I need to speak with a US accountant because I'm relocating to the US. I said, yes, there's a lot we can offer. When can you come in? And they said, well, actually, I'm at Ben Gurion Airport at the moment, about to get on the plane. So you're saying that person now, that person actually could come into our office and get some good
Not
consult on what to do.
Yes. Not as much, but there's definitely still some options for them.
I think
Yeah.
that call was also made from a payphone, so I think
Now you can get it on the while they're flying in the air on their way to LAX. Yeah,
very
you can
cool.
pick it up.
All right, Yaakov, good to be together again,
Fantastic.
and I hope people are good. There's a lot of good takeaways here, and we'll
Yeah,
see you soon with our next interesting and exciting topic, whatever that may be.
absolutely. Looking forward, Philip. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
Again,
you.
looking forward to seeing you on the next
Bye bye.